Geronimo, that old Apache warrior who lived out his life as a prisoner of war, was brought to the ranch in chains by soldier guards so he could shoot and skin a buffalo for the benefit of a horde of oogling white folks. In the eyes of visitors, both foreign and domestic, the modern American West is still first and foremost the Wild West. And I think one of the best examples of how this came about is the story of a family in the empire they created, where literally the American West of reality merged with the West of myth. And that's the largest story I want to share with you. So to begin with, I chose these words: once upon a time. With those four simple words, I begin to weave the story of the Miller family and their remarkable kingdom. Once upon a time, a phrase most often used at the beginning of fairy stories, seemed the best way to commence my story about the 101 Ranch. Once upon a time in the far reaches of north-central Oklahoma, not far from the Kansas border, was a ranch empire of cattle, bucking horses, oil fields, and grasslands. The 101, as it should be properly called, at its zenith encompassed more than 110,000 acres, sprawling over parts of 4 Oklahoma counties. It became known far and wide as the wildest, the woolliest, and the most unusual operation of its kind in the history of the American West. As a 101 publication from 1910 put it, quote, "The 101 Ranch of Bliss, Oklahoma, owned by the 3 Miller brothers, is the wonder spot and the showplace of all the great Southwest. Here is ranching in all its old-time picturesqueness. Here are the thousands of cattle and horses, the unblocked trails and the cattle pastures, the unchanged cowboys and the Wild West girls, the roundup camps, the corrals, and many tribes of primitive Indians living undisturbed in wigwam, lodge, or roughhouse." Everything, and I do mean everything about the place, was done on a grand scale. This, my friends, is an important American story. This is an unrivaled story of the West. This is the quintessential story of how myth and reality often become one. The Miller family, the owners of the 101, oversaw an operation that included a sizable cattle ranch, the largest diversified farm in the world, a Wild West show, and substantial oil and gas holdings. The Millers' domain, both in Oklahoma and later in California, also served as the cradle for the Western motion picture industry. The Millers and their legion of cowboys and cowgirls operated their own train system, including a string of 150 freight and Pullman cars. They grew far more food than they needed. After oil was discovered on the ranch in the early 1900s, they ran every engine on the premises with fuel pumped from beneath the ranch's sod. The holdings of the 101 included thousands and thousands of acres devoted to wheat, oats, corn, and forage. The ranch's immensity contained schools and churches, hundreds of miles of public and private roads. A telephone system linked the bustling ranch headquarters, known as the White House, to every single foreman and cow boss on the distant range. Mounted riders delivered daily mail to all sections of the ranch. At the popular 2-story 101 Ranch store, shoppers could purchase everything from a needle to a Ford car. Combining a department store and a trading post, it catered primarily to ranch workers, but also attracted a clientele from a radius of more than 100 miles. Hired hands were paid with printed 101 folding money known as bucks. and with coins stamped from copper and brass known as broncs, because of the image of the famed soon-to-be stuntman Yakima Canute on a bucking horse emblazoned on the coins. The money was used to buy clothing, boots, groceries at the store, to purchase food and drink at the concession stands, and to pay off gambling and bootlegging debts. This extraordinary spread, now long vanished and largely forgotten and disregarded, remains the stuff of legends. Salty cowboys, macho cowboys who spent lifetimes chasing calves, sleeping in drafty bunkhouses, loved that old ranch better than any place on earth. Cowgirls, and I'm talking about genuine cowgirls, 101% all-woman cowgirls who could ride, rope, and shoot with the best of them, called the ranch their home. All of them, man, woman, child, white, black, brown, red, renegade, and champion, all of them believed the 101 would go on forever. Some of them argued that this was truly the place where the souls of sagebrush heroes and heroines and the most audacious saddle tramps were summoned to rest. And although this mythical domain has been broken up and burned and mistreated and subdivided and scattered to the winds, I knew a few of the old grizzled veterans who still contended, still swore on their sainted mother's eyes that the ranch was a cowboy and cowgirl's Valhalla. On this mammoth ranch, launched in the late 1890s, but with roots all the way back to bluegrass country of antebellum Kentucky, thrived a rollicking company of buckaroos, wranglers, ropers, trick shooters, wild horse riders, convicts, kings, movie stars, dudes, outlaws, lawmen, blue bloods, and rednecks, royalty, and everyday folks felt at home at the 101. Guests from around the world, around the globe, who ventured into those broad meadows of tall grass could have expected to see vast herds of grazing cattle and bison, fleet cow ponies. They might have also encountered camels and elephants and dancing mules. Oil tycoons and cigar-chewing politicians came to the ranch to sip aged whiskey and dine on roasted buffalo and wager huge sums of cash, not on sleek horses, but on turtles, box turtles that raced at a gala event dubbed the National Terrapin Derby. Even finicky Easterners could not help but feel like kids again when they set foot on the 101 and shed their Yankee proprieties. A young lariat artist dubbed the Cherokee Kid, who became better known as Will Rogers, twirled a rope, sang cowboy songs all night long when he came calling at the ranch. Lucille Mulhall, America's first cowgirl, according to Teddy Roosevelt, rode with the 101 for a time. Geronimo, that old Apache warrior who lived out his life as a prisoner of war, was brought to the ranch in chains by soldier guards so he could shoot and skin a buffalo for the benefit of a horde of oogling white folks. They claimed it was his last buffalo, but undoubtedly it was his first. Band leader John Philip Sousa became an honorary member of the Ponca tribe during a visit. Admiral Richard Byrd, after he explored the North Pole, rode an elephant over the 101 ranch ranges. The nation's premier horticulturist, Luther Burbank, studied the records of crops grown on the ranch, as did entire classes of university students, hungry for the agricultural knowledge they could not find anywhere else but at the 101. Of course, Theodore Roosevelt and perennial presidential candidate William Jennings Bryan were guests at the ranch. So were Warren G. Harding, John D. Rockefeller, Jess Willard, General John Blackjack Pershing, Pawnee Bill Lilly, and William S. Hart, the great early Western film star. Others who came to the ranch included writers Edna Ferber and Mary Roberts Reinhardt, yellow journalism publisher William Randolph Hearst, boxing champ Jack Dempsey, and no question in my mind, one of the most mythologized Western figures of all, William Frederick Buffalo Bill Cody, an early Miller competitor who spent his last days riding under the 101 name and banner. The Miller guests sat down to tender beefsteak bigger than saddlebags, served at that imposing stucco ranch headquarters, the White House, not far from the meandering and sometimes treacherous Salt Fork River. During the first 3 decades of the 20th century, the 101 Ranch Wild West Show was known around the world. It featured as many as 1,000 performers. Many of the 101 Ranch alumni were rough and tumble stars and luminaries whose names became household words. The costume figures pictured on the 101 Ranch show posters, which came to life on movie screens and during shows at hundreds of hometown arenas, helped to create an American consciousness of the West that would be manifested in early Hollywood films. Now, certainly, the men and women of the 101 were a flamboyant bunch. Bandits and lawmen with not six guns who spent most of their lives riding the range traveled with the ranch's Wild West circuit. So did a multitude of others. And sometimes their timing was impeccable. More than a few of them made the leap from real life to film just as the Western motion picture industry was being created at the ranch. Tom Mix, Hoot Gibson, Buck Jones, Ken Maynard, Yakima Canute, who later taught John Wayne, who was afraid of horses, how to ride a horse, and so many others saddled cow ponies and drew wages from the 101 Ranch paymaster before they became famous film stars. Ben Johnson Sr., daddy of Ben Johnson, the great actor, worked as a bunkhouse barber, and Elizabeth Taylor's mother acted in early Miller Brothers film productions on the Salt Fork. Bill Pickett, the fabled black cowboy who invented the rodeo sport of bulldogging, proudly rode for the 101 until the day he died, when the old hand was kicked by a Mustang in a ranch corral. During the ranch's glory years, extending through the 1920s, movie crews moved freely around the property among working cowboys and cowgirls. Sometimes outlaws, real outlaws, appeared in the movies or made movies of their own. On Sundays, free rodeos were held. But what was not so well known, especially abroad, but right here at home, was that this show and those performers originated from an original working ranch that truly did rival all the great cattle operations featured in the folklore of the West. So it was on this ranch that the West of imagination literally collided and merged with the West of reality. And sometimes that collision was gentle, and sometimes it was head on. Either way, it was a spectacle that can never be duplicated. But that was a long time ago. Once upon a time, as some might say. For me, as a writer of history and American culture, as a human geographer, as an author who likes to help set things straight and heal old wounds, putting together the story of the Miller family and that remarkable empire, and of all those who rode for the 101, was the realization of a dream. So researching and writing about this lively troop of wranglers and Indians and entertainers and others of the ranch, and weaving an explanation of the West of which they were so much a part, as I like to emphasize ad nauseum, where reality and imagination collided and became one. That became an obligation that I cherished.